invite up on the stage Mr. Tunne Kelam, Member of European Parliament and long-time Estonian politician. Please, Mr. Kelam.
Yes, good evening. I am trying to use the unofficial common language of Iceland, English. We are newcomers. We just arrived less than 2 hours ago. But greetings from Estonia, and last Saturday we marked in the Baltic states 25 years from the restoration of the communist Soviet occupation. And as you know, our national hero, one of them is your former foreign minister, Jon Hannibalsson, who was the first one who decided to restore diplomatic relations with the Baltic states, which continued to exist legally despite of the occupation, in the same way as Denmark or Norway continued to exist despite the Nazi occupation. The difference of occupation was in its length. Norway and Denmark were occupied for 5 years almost. The Baltic states were occupied for 50 years. And my personal example maybe is relevant here. My first trip abroad took place in summer 1939. It was July. My parents took me to Finland for 2 weeks, what was normal at that time. They had many friends there. I was told that I was in a state of opposition. I didn't want to leave my country and home. But finally we returned. I became 3 years old in Finland. And a few weeks later, Stalin and Hitler became friends. There was so-called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. The personal impact of this pact to me was that my second visit abroad was delayed exactly by half a century. It took place in 1989. Once again to Finland and then on to Canada and the United States to advocate for the restoration of Estonian independence. But I think it is relevant today to have a better understanding what did it mean, the communist totalitarian power in eastern part of Europe. And as we all know, it was a result of Nazi-Soviet pact, which, by the way, was the starting point for the World War II, because World War II was not possible without having two dictators, not one. It was Stalin's agreement to attack Poland. Both dictators divided Poland between themselves, and the eastern part of Europe was ceded to Stalin. Now, it is interesting that there was 3 days later in Estonia, and in Baltic states, in Poland, in Hungary, in Slovakia, we marked 77 years from this infamous Nazi-Soviet pact. Why? Because I was one of them who 7 years ago, in 2009, was one of the initiators in the European Parliament for the first European Parliament's resolution about European conscience and totalitarianism. In this resolution, we for the first time made an equal approach to all victims of totalitarian systems in Europe. Be they victims of Nazism, of communism, or Franco dictatorship. And the concrete result was to mark 23rd of August from then on as a day of commemoration of all victims of totalitarian systems in Europe. Estonia did it for the 8th time. But our call was that all European states should join marking and commemorating victims of all totalitarian systems. Because when Estonia and the Baltic states joined the European Union, it was now 12 years ago, I was elected for the first time to the European Parliament, and my first disappointment was how little interest our colleagues from the western part of Europe felt for what happened for half a century in eastern part of Europe. And their conclusion was that, yes, it must have been difficult and it was sad, but now you are free again, and let's march together to a brighter future. But what is the problem today? The problem is that for the victims of Nazis, the clear signal on authoritative, moral and political level has been sent just after the end of World War II. Never again. These crimes were so horrible that we need to do everything to prevent them happening again. The difference between victims of Nazism and communism is that for the victims of communism, no such guarantee has been given. It has been, in fact, relegated to the realm of subsidiarity. It is a business of every nation to deal with its past. And it was the British historian Norman Davies who, in his book, Europe, East and West, tried for the first time to discover and point out to the connections between the histories of eastern part of Europe and western part of Europe. But my personal experience has been that we can't ignore this problem, because same things are happening today in modern Europe and modern world. What was the logic in 1940, 41? The logic was that the enemy of my enemy must be my ally by necessity. Today, we see a republication in Icelandic language, one of the books by Hans Oras, about the occupation, Soviet occupation in Estonia. And what was interesting that time, that when the Soviets forced the Baltic states to conclude so-called mutual assistance pacts in September 1939, then they regarded the threat not in Nazi Germany, which was their friend. The Soviet Union provided Nazi Germany with everything for almost 2 years, sending grain, sending strategic materials, sending political support, and banning Western political parties like in French Communist Party to oppose the Nazi occupation. So we could say that Soviet Union was co-responsible for the Nazi occupation of western part of Europe. And so Estonian government in June 1940 was accused by Stalin of too close relations with Great Britain. Germany was not seen as an enemy, it was seen as a friend. And Estonians were advised to develop more ties with Nazi Germany. and avoid any links with United Kingdom. Only in 1941 that changed, and so result was, as we know, Soviet Union escaped responsibility for its initial aggression. Today, as I mentioned, we see the same threat. In the West, many people think that we need to ally all forces against fighting against Islamic State, which is seen as the greatest greatest threat. And this is what happened more than 50 years ago, 70 years ago. So once again, aggressors can escape responsibility, trying to prove that there's only one threat and we must ally all forces against it, like it was a slogan after Hitler attacked Stalin. And I think this is dangerous, this is risky, and it is unrealistic. Because if we look at today's Syria, only in 1 month, last month, the Russian air attacks killed more civilians than ISIS attacks in 3 months' time. And even up to date, speaking about 5 years of Syrian domestic war, Assad forces and its allies, including Iran, have killed about 65% of all the victims, not ISIS. This is not an excuse for Islamic terrorists, but it is clear indications that we need to deal with several threats, and it is very difficult to decide what is the worst. Anyway, speaking about Hans Oras's book, I think it is very important today to take such a genuine, very impressive look what happened in one democratic state in 1 month's time. That was from June to July 1940. When Soviets forced Baltic states to conclude so-called mutual assistance agreements and allow Soviet troops and bases to their territory, they were guaranteed that the social and political order will not be changed, that the Soviet Union will honor their independence. In 1 year, in less than 1 year, it changed. And Hans Oras is describing it extremely convincing way. In 1 month's time, after a puppet parliament, where before the elections there was only one list of candidates allowed, decided to join the Soviet Union. In 1 month, all the land was nationalized. All peasants, all farmers were confiscated the land. All the bank accounts were confiscated except minimal sums of money. All shareholders were punished, even for having 1 share in the banks, because they were considered to be capitalist exploiters. And so it went on and went on until the civil society was totally destroyed, only in a few months' time. And I think today, if we want to provide some hope, some better future, and first of all, peace and stability, and of course, democracy, I think we need to draw lessons. What happened now 77, 76 years ago as a result of communist totalitarianism. And the difference still is too that we can't speak about real Nazi movements. There have been sprouts of them, but they have been immediately criticized and outlawed. But today, in today's world, there are still communist countries where communism is official ideology and one-party system. So this is a challenge for us, to have a realistic view to what is threats. And speaking about Estonia, I can only say that Estonian history has been sort of Hamlet-type history. For centuries it has been the dilemma to be or not to be. After the Great Northern War, the country was so devastated after the war between Sweden and Russia that maybe 100,000 people were left. There was always threat to its culture, its population, its language. And Estonian history has demonstrated that against all the odds, 25 years ago, we succeeded to restore independence, the nation state. But the history also sends a lesson that nothing is ever guaranteed. Like it happened in 1940, nobody expected, and Ansvaras expresses it in a very, very convincing way. They hoped for the last moment that it would not become so bad as it could be assumed. And it came out that it was much worse than it could be expected. So nothing is guaranteed in today's world, too. If we don't stand up for democracy, for civil society, for citizens' freedom, and first of all, for solidarity. Because unfortunate process of events in 1930s showed that Western democracies tried to escape conflict with Hitler. They agreed to divide Czechoslovakia as a price for retaining the peace. The result was the opposite. Trying to look aside from the real threats made these threats much more serious. And everyone lost as a result of this miscalculation. So today we need to draw lessons, and that's why we are here. Thank you very much.